Welcome back to the Morning Juice. I'm your host, Juice. Today's episode, I have a very dear friend of mine that's been with me since the beginning of my recovery. He's going to come on and talk about his career as a police officer and his road to recovery. I'd like for everybody to welcome Scott to my show. What's up, brother?
Hey, man. How's it going?
All right, how you doing?
Good. Oh, Lord.
I'm glad to have you here, man.
Glad to be here.
So tell us your story.
Oh, man. Well, born and raised here in Nashville, Tennessee. I grew up in West Nashville. As a kid, my dad was a patrol officer with the Nashville Police Department. My mother stayed home with us for a while until we were old enough, started going to school. Then she started a career in real estate, which she did really wonderful. But, I have an older brother. What I remember about my childhood, so I am an alcoholic, I'm an addict. I was diagnosed with PTSD, depression, and anxiety. Most of that came from my career, which I'll get into. But as a child, I can remember my earliest memories was drinking. So I started drinking about the age of 12, kind of. I would know what beer to get my dad from the fridge, and I'd get a sip of it, and I remember always wanting to be just like him. Let me say this, everybody I looked up into my life, my uncles, my grandfathers, my dad, were all alcoholics. So to me, that was a normal life, and it's what you did, right? I remember him saying, because my dad was a very, very hard worker. Ended up being a detective for 20 years. He ended up having a 33-year career with the Metro Police Department.
Nice.
Very well respected, very great guy. He was sick, and he just drank, and that's just it's funny. People we talk about drinking in my family, and what we say, that's just what we do.
Yeah.
It's just what we always do, right? I've had cousins, a police department, cousins, fire department. So a lot of guys, military guys. So most of my family and the guys are give some kind of service, which, we're very proud of.
Yeah.
Most of which have retired. I think we only have one active first responder right now, which is my cousin, who is a fireman, and we give him hell. He's the only one. He's smarter than all of us, actually. But I remember my dad telling me as a kid, he's like, if you work hard, at the end of the day, you get to have a beer. That was your reward, So I remember as a kid, we lived in this neighborhood in Bellevue, and I cut grass in the neighborhood, like 10 to 15 yards. I had two guys that worked for me, and we made a killing, an absolute killing. And I remember I didn't care about the money at all. I wanted the beer at the end of the day, which is what I got. So, I mean, that right there should have suggested, an issue. But, there's certain memories, and my mother never knew most of this stuff, if any of it. Going to watch my dad play ball. My dad was a great athlete, and he played in a church league on Nolensville Road, and we would always stop after the game to get my mom donuts, Krispy Kreme donuts, which is funny because, cops.
Yeah.
And then we'd go across the street to the liquor store, and we'd get a 6-pack of beer, and we would drive on the way home. And we'd drink on the way home, And then we would get back to our neighborhood, which was big, and then he would stop and let me drive after drinking, which is now is insane.
Right.
I have two sons. One just graduated high school yesterday. One's going to be a junior in high school this year, and I can't even fathom them doing the things that I did. It's terrifying to me.
Yeah.
Thank God they don't. And I'm actually very proud. I'm very proud of the fact that I've never let my kids have a sip of anything, right?
Yeah.
So I started this last journey in 2018. There's been ups and downs and stuff like that, but I was thinking about this. There's no date for PTSD. There's no date you can put on depression and that kind of stuff. But it's been a crazy journey, right? And there's lots of ups and downs. And I look at it and I think, I was talking with my sponsor the other day, and we were talking about good and bad things that happen. And I've never heard anyone say this, and it struck such a chord with me. He said, "How do you know what's good and bad?" And I was like, "Well, this, and this." He said, "No, you know what you want, what you don't want." He's like, "Have you ever had something bad happen and end up being a good thing?" Absolutely. And I can point to him.
Yeah.
And he's like, "There you go." And I'm like, "Okay." And I think about like the pain of all this stuff of addiction and everything that happens. And it's like, good. Because without the hurt, it won't change.
Right.
Without the pain, there's no reason to change, right?
Right.
But going back, so throughout high school, I was not a very good student. I did not care about school. I went to play ball and eat lunch, talk to girls, whatever it was, hang out with my friends. I hated school. But I remember the first time someone told me I was an alcoholic, I was 16 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, and I thought that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And looking back on it, I clearly was. Ended up going through high school, just typical high school. It was fun. We had a blast. We lots of parties and stuff like that. We never really did too much. And I did one night drink. I never drank and drive in high school except one time.
Yeah.
And I came home. My dad always waited up for me to talk. And so I come home. I know I've been drinking, and I bypass him. My dad's one of the best detectives I've ever met in my life.
Right.
He's not going to let me just go upstairs. This is so abnormal. And so he came upstairs and kind of followed me. And he got right next to me. He said, "You have fun tonight?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "We'll talk about it in the morning. Go to bed." And so I'm now, my life is in danger. He's going to kill me. He was a very, very big man. I was not, I'm still not, but he was huge. And the next morning he pulled me aside and he said, "Were you drunk last night?" I said, "Yes." I mean, there's no lying to him. It was,
Right.
"Yes, sir." And he just said, don't do it again. And that's all he said. I wasn't in trouble. He didn't tell my mom, all that. And I'm like, how am I not murdered right now?
Right.
But that's just something that he had done 1,000 times, I'm sure. He grew up with a dad who was an alcoholic, who, World War II vet, I think clearly had PTSD.
Oh, obviously.
My dad clearly had it. He was involved in several major incidents in his career, but it was like nobody talked about it, because if you talk about it, you're weak.
Right.
If you talk about it, no one's going to want to work with you. But anyway, so and that was it. And then I ended up going to college. Most people don't. My major was special education. I wanted to be a special education teacher, which is I participate a lot with Special Olympics with the kids, and I loved it. But after the first semester, it didn't go very well. The college thought we should take some time apart, so I came back home and decided that it was something I always kind of knew, and I was raised to be a cop. From childhood, I cannot sit with my back to the door. I've got to be able to see who's coming in and out. I need to be able to see the threats and all that stuff. And looking at it now, that's kind of crazy, but like that's just the way it was. It was so normal to me that I didn't think anything of it. So, anyways, came back, bought a house with the rest of my college money. I had 2 buddies that lived with me. We're 20 years old, living in our own house, working together at the time before I went to the police academy, and just it's what we did. It was a nonstop party, and it was fun. We had a good time. But eventually those good times stop.
Right.
Eventually that alcohol stops becoming a luxury and becomes a necessity. But that's down the line. But so anyways, I decided I was going to do the police department, and Dad everybody knew I was going to do it. He really didn't try to stop me. He was proud. I think he was proud. He was scared. He was proud. But I do think he was really nervous because he knew what it did to him.
Yeah.
He knew what it could do to me. But I mean, just like with my kids, whatever makes you happy, I'll support it, So 21 years old, I joined the police department. I was the youngest person on the department, second youngest, excuse me. The one guy was younger than me by 2 days. So I'm a baby. I go to this police academy, kind of keep my head down, get through it. I actually took him about halfway through the academy to realize my dad was, because I just kept my mouth shut. There was 5 of us in my class that have dads on the department, which was really cool. Still talk to some of those guys today, most of which have retired early.
Yeah.
I was talking to one of them yesterday, and I think there's only 10 out of our class left. But anyway, so, and that's kind of how it rolled, I lived a decent privileged life. I was, we were upper middle class, I'd say. And so a lot of these places that, that I ended up working, I'd never been to. But, it's kind of, I was a child. Like I look at officers now and I'm like, how does your mom know you're an officer? Right. You're way too young for this. But so I started working West Nashville, and I was talking. My wife says this all the time. She's like, you always. So my wife does not. We got married after I retired, but she says she makes this point, and she's correct. She says you always talk about the same 3 or 4 calls, and those are the ones that truly stick with you.
Yeah.
One thing that people don't see is what it does, what that type of job does to the officer. and I'll talk a little bit more about my career in a minute, but like most of my career was spent in fun, like doing things outside of having to see really horrible stuff. And there are guys that saw way more than I did.
Right.
The patrol guys, bless them, you know, they go through so much because, you know, no one ever called the police. It's like, hey, I just want to tell you I'm having a good day and everything's great over here, right?
Everything's awesome.
Everything's awesome. Yeah, you know, we respond to the worst of the worst. We see it constantly. You know, nobody likes us.
No.
You know, nobody, you know, and we're always the bad guy because, you know, we show up to a place, we take someone to jail or you know, have to fight or whatever it is, you know, or we have to deliver. And one of my worst things that having to deliver death notifications.
Yeah.
Horrible. And it's terrible. I don't ever want to do it again. You know what was sad, but working in recovery now, I have dealt with more death than I ever did in the police department.
Yeah.
And it's terrible. And now what happens is I get death notifications. Hey, this guy you worked with died. And first thing you think is, what could I have said? What could I have done to make a difference?
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
the first thing my sponsor told me is, who do you think you are? And I was like, man, he's like, you couldn't even save yourself for 41 years. What are you going to do to save some? Like, what could you have said? And the truth is, there's not really, you know, we can provide the resources, we can provide an example, but that's it. They've got to choose it themselves. And I think I know that very well. You do too.
Oh, yeah.
You know, but you know, there's certain things when I had that career that really stick with me. A lot of which have a lot of people taking their own lives. And you know, I still remember the very first one, and I can see it very vividly, which was a young lady in Nashville. And I got the call, and I didn't want to go. I was very close. I did not want to go to it. I didn't want to see it. But, you know, as time went on, what bothered me was not the people. It was the people who were alive.
Yeah.
I can still see that guy on that first one. He was in the fetal position, rocking, screaming as loud as he could. Or the mom in Sylvan Park whose son, and that sticks with you. And I can still hear it today. So one thing that when I got into recovery that I didn't do was therapy and EMDR and all that stuff. But when I did, I got better. But so as my career goes through, the drinking increases. As soon as I get home, the first thing I do is pour a drink, you know, kiss the kids, pour a drink. And then, you know, it's a daily thing. But still it wasn't, I mean, it was getting to be a problem, but it wasn't to the breaking point yet.
Right.
But, you know, I remember I was at work, it was 2009. So I got to work with my dad for 5 years. We worked for the same lieutenant.
That's awesome.
We got to chase it. We got a foot chase together, chased a guy. Like, it was just cool. Like, this was the guy I want to be like. Now I'm side by side with him working, right? And he's obviously slowing down, but he ended up retiring in 2000 and I think around 2006. And so he left. And I tell you one thing, I had a really bad car wreck. It's the only really bad injury that I had when I worked in the department. I had a really bad car wreck. And what I really thought about was how awful this was for him. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. My sergeant calls him, and he picks up the phone, and he hears my sergeant's name, and he said the first thing I said was, "How bad is he?" Because he knew I was hurt.
Yeah.
You know, and having kids, I'm like, oh, what an awful, because he knew exactly what I was out doing. Well, what an awful thing. But other than that, like, my career was spent in undercover units. It was a lot of fun. I got to work with some of the best detectives I've ever worked with. I'm not going to say their names because, you know, they're still out there. But what a privilege it was to work with those guys. They were professional. They were really good at what they did, and they always had my back. So one of the things that, you know, when I got to these fun units, my job on, I helped train the new detectives. I worked, the goal was to get to SID, Special Investigations Narcotics Unit, and that's where I wanted to go. And that's where I ended up. And, you know, when you do entries, most of the guys want to be the point man. That was my spot. You know, I was the first one to go through the door. And that's important because at about that time is when I started realizing, you know, maybe I got a problem, you know. But it was at that time I found out my father was sick. And I got called to the hospital. And this is how ignorant I was on alcoholism and all that stuff. I made it to work every day. I was able to train every day. It never affected any of that stuff, so I can't be an alcoholic. There's no way possible, right? Alcoholics miss work, you know, and all that stuff. But I got called to the hospital, and they said, your dad's sick. And I was like, what do you mean he's sick? So I ended up going to the hospital, and I walked into the room, and I'll never forget, he was probably 6'3", probably 240. And he was laying in the bed, and he was shaking, and he was sweating, and he was talking with a British accent, which he had never done in his life. I never heard this. And it was the funniest thing I've ever seen. He did it for 2 days. And I said, what is going on? They said, he's in the late stages of cirrhosis of the liver. I'm like, well, I don't even know what that means. They're like, it means he's dying.
Yeah.
I'm like, what do you mean he's dying? Fix him. You know? And I remember he was kind of, it was during when he was, I said, just knock him out, let him rest. They said, we can't give him anything else. If we do, we'll kill him. That's how much they'd already given him.
Yeah.
Of Ativan or something like that. But anyways, so it was at that time, it was like, how do we fix this guy? You know, and the truth is, like, he wasn't going to be fixed. And I remember I was talking with him. He was in the hospital, and he was begging me to stop drinking. And I'm like, man, you're going to be fine. He's like, no, I'm not. And he said, all I want to do is watch Jack play ball and meet Wyatt. He never met my youngest son. And he knew I wasn't going to do it.
Yeah.
And he said, will you please take me home to die? And I said, absolutely, I will. So I got a hospital bed, but I told him, I said, do you have anything in the house? Any alcohol? And he said, no. I said, well, I'm going to look right now. You know I can search. He's like, all right, look in the jacket pocket here. He had vodka hidden all over the house. And I thought to myself, what are you thinking? Like, you're still, in my mind, you're still trying to drink. You know you're dying, and you won't tell me about this. How can you be that weak? And that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Until I tried to stop it and understood it.
Right.
Right? It's truly a powerlessness. You know, I found out later that a guy that I actually know in sobriety took him to an AA meeting one time, and he never went back. I never knew that. But I thought to myself, how could you let this happen? You know, how could you do this? You're supposed to be here. And like good, you know, any good alcoholic, I make it about me. Like, you're supposed to be here for me, you know, and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But the truth is, he was very sick, and there was nothing anyone could do that, you know, that he had to do it himself. And it was kind of like one of those. It's like, to get a liver transplant, you got to be in treatment so long, be sober so long, and he was already to a bad point. He had hurt his back as well. He wasn't stable enough to go to, it just, there was nothing. And I talked to his doctor, and straight up, I asked him, how do we fix him? And he said, he's dead.
Yeah.
There's nothing you do. And like, to hear that, it's like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Why are you giving up? You know, and the truth is, he was so, and that was so traumatic, because like, this is the strongest man I've ever met. You know, my dad could definitely beat up your dad. Like, there's no question about it.
Yeah.
Everybody loved him. He knew people. He knew the entire, like, we couldn't go to anywhere without somewhere he knew. Like, he was the mayor, like, he was unbelievable. But a few weeks later to a month later, I found out in August, late August, and November 21st, he was gone. That's how fast it was. But I remember I went to the hospital to pick him up to take him home, and he was walking towards me with a walker. And all of a sudden, now he looks 75.
Right.
He's lost, by the time he passed, he had lost 60, 70 pounds. It was so fast. I've seen a guy in recovery at a place that I worked, and he walking, same thing. I couldn't even look at it. I left. I couldn't watch him, because and he looked just like him.
Yeah.
And it was one of those, it was like, how? I don't understand it. So anyways, we took him home. Hospice came. I stayed there and slept next to him for 3 days. My brother refused to come home. They didn't have a good relationship, so I was there by myself with other family, the rest of my family.
Yeah.
But, you know, I couldn't take it. I had hidden that beer in the bushes out back, and I would go out. This is the only break I would take, go out to drink, because I didn't know other way to handle it.
Yeah.
When he took his last breath, I was drunk, and I don't know any other way to get. I could have got through it. I had no skills. I had no desire to not get through it sober. But yeah, so after he passed, we got him buried. And that's when you would think it would be the opposite. My drinking then really took off.
Right.
And then it was on. And I didn't want to feel, I didn't want to think, I didn't want to do any of that stuff. You know, and at this point, I kind of start, like, I really, you know, I've got sons. I'm thinking to myself, I'm doing to them what he did to me. I need to stop this. And so I ended up going to the police department and said, hey, I need help. And it was such a hard decision. I tell you why, and this is what guys think. it's, I'm the point guy on this team. They have to follow me through this door. If I go get help and tell them I can't handle this, then they're not going to trust me. They're going to think I'm weak. They're not going to work with me and all of that stuff. And I do a lot of, speaking with departments today. And the question I ask is like, how many people think that if you ask for help, you're weak? And everyone raises their hand. And I'm like, now look at your buddy. What would you think the same thing about them? And everybody's like, no, of course not. It's what we do to ourselves.
Right.
It's that pride and that ego that I have to be, I can't have any problems and all, and that's just insane.
I'm gonna correct everybody else's problems, but the hell with mine.
Absolutely, I can maintain. I'm doing good. I'm holding it together. The truth is, no, we're not. No, we're not. Who are we fooling? So, I ended up. The department always said, if you need help, come to us. We'll help you get it. So, I ended up being the first to do that. The wellness unit still refers to me as the test case. They didn't know how to handle it, honestly. And so I always tell what happened, and I'll always tell what happened, but I will say, before I even tell what happened, it's completely different now. The way the units handle guys who have issues is phenomenal. They do a top-notch job, and I will always be grateful that they changed it. And I'm where I'm supposed to be, and what happened to me, and I'm okay with that. That was my path.
Right.
I'm where I'm supposed to be.
With the changes.
Absolutely. So anyways, when I did go to treatment the first time, I remember going and then telling them how I needed to be fixed. That works out well.
Yeah.
Let me tell you how to fix me. And they're like, if you knew, you wouldn't be here, right? And I remember meeting with a therapist twice. I didn't want anything to do with it. They sent me to see the doctor. I got in an argument, almost a fight with the doctor. They never let me go back to him the way I talked to him. I was just full of anger, full of all that stuff. I can't believe that I have to be here because I'm supposed to be this perfect person, and we hold ourselves to the standard that's unattainable.
Absolutely.
I can give you grace all day long, but I have to be perfect, and when I can't achieve perfection, it's a problem. Well, my sponsor told me the other day, he said, welcome to the human race. Because you think like if you have an officer, they're right. When they come, they're right, or someone go, what I'm saying? They control everything, and that's what it is. It's control.
Yeah.
And it's ego and it's pride, and it's like I was okay to say, hey, I need help, but I wasn't willing to accept the help.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was. I was just lost. But anyways, so I came back. They threw some things at me that I did not think were fair, that I didn't like. I thought it was punitive, like. They were doing it. They didn't know what they didn't know how to handle it. Right. And so one thing I tell people now in departments now, I'm like, if you just write out a list of what they got to do when they come back, because if I had seen this, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. It just felt like it was like, all right, we're going to do this because that's what we think today. Or,
it's like darts on a dartboard.
Absolutely. And so a few months later, after I got back, I came back and went back to work. At this point, I had left. This was after I had left narcotics and got promoted to sergeant, and I was working in patrol in Hermitage precinct. And so after that, I had decided that it was time for me to go, and so I retired. Is it funny? I had actually, at this point, I had a job offer making more money outside the department, so I went and took it. And honestly, I felt like I needed to go. I didn't feel like I could stay.
Yeah.
Which sucks because I had a very good career.
Yeah.
I had a very distinguished career. I worked in great units. We did some great things. But in my head, it was like, I did what you told me to do, and now you're punishing me for it.
You felt like you was getting picked on.
Absolutely. Now, having said that, I want to say again, that's not the way it is anymore.
Right.
And everything changed. And so I'm happy because I work with guys today from the same department, and they are treating them so good. Chief Drake and all those, David Kennington at the wellness unit is the guy I went through. Going to have dinner with him soon. Like I still talk to them, still work with them, and there's no hard feelings with me at all. And I'm actually going to do some training for them because they're really interested in getting better, and that's a phenomenal thing. So, ended up leaving there, and it's kind of started a company doing PI stuff. Don't do it anymore. Ended up having a relapse. That was really bad. Ended up. My 41st birthday, I was asked to leave our home, which was completely legit, totally good. But I had to leave my boys there. Awful.
Right.
So the day I left there, they were holding on to me crying, left. And like any good alcoholic, what do you think I did?
Oh, you went and got
Straight to the liquor store. Well, I drank myself into oblivion for a few weeks. And was trying to decide if I want to live or not. And I said, all right, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. And it was terrible. And I didn't want to live. I really didn't.
know that feeling.
Mm-hmm. But I said, all right, I'm gonna do this AA thing one time. And so I ended up working a 12-step program, and I went and I got to work, and then I went to therapy. My therapist probably saved my life for sure. And it was one of those. It's kind of because like if you deal with a cop or an ex-cop, she had been married to a cop, so she knew how to talk to me.
Yeah.
And I'm not one that you can like. You need to tell me what I need. No,
Right.
You don't need to make suggestions. You need to just tell me what to do.
Right.
So that's what I did, and I got to work. So I had decided, and my deal was, I'm going to try the whole thing one time, everything that they tell me to do, and if it doesn't work, I'll just die. And that seemed like a pretty legit deal at the time in my head, right?
Yeah, that's the same thing I did.
But I'll say this, and it's kind of weird when I started doing what I was told to do, not what I wanted, not what I thought. I got better and it was fast enough. I was like, this can't be real. Like, I've got to be joking, but I thought, well, if I'm just tricking myself, I'm still believing it, so why not just keep doing it?
Right.
So I just kept on. But early recovery was very difficult for me. I let the company go. I was depressed. I was dealing with still trying to do treatment, therapy, meetings, and all that stuff. And it was just hard. And it got to a point where I felt like I was a burden to everybody I ever met. I had no money. I definitely told there was days I would feed the kids. I'm not hungry at school, and then they'd turn around and I'd eat what they had was left.
Yeah.
And my oldest son, there was a lot of issues. He was not a fan of me at all, and he shouldn't have been.
Right.
He absolutely shouldn't have been. And one of the hardest things, and people deal with it a lot, is that they get sober 30, 60 days, whatever it was, and they're like, they're still mad at me. And
yes.
I remember talking to my sponsor about it, and I was like, he's still mad. He won't talk to me. It's been 60 days. And he's like, and he said, no one gives a fuck you've been sober 60 days. No one cares. And I was like, what? He's like, so is your dog. Like, what do you want? You can't, and he told me that, he said, you cannot decide how long it takes him to forgive you for something you did to him.
Which is one of the lessons you taught me with my oldest one.
That's right. And it still stands true today. And it was a long road. It was a long road with him. He was very protective of his mother, and he should have been. I remember he saw me get my 3-year coin. It's the first time he said he's proud of me. Yesterday or this week, he graduated high school, and everything's a lot better. But it took 3 years and 3 days for him to tell me he loved me again, and this has been built over time, and it took way longer than I wanted or expected or thought it should, but it's not up to me,
right.
Luckily, my youngest was a lot better. He was younger. He was more of a daddy's boy at the time, and we all have a good relationship today. But it really sucked. And, there was a point where I was evicted from my apartment 2 days before Christmas in 2019. My car was repossessed right after that. And it was one of those things where I'd talk to my sponsor, and I'd tell him, and he's like, just be grateful. And I'm like, what do you mean just be grateful? And he goes, do you like that car? And I said, I hated that car. He goes, just be grateful. But I was like, now what do I do? But what I've learned is what I was saying earlier, what's good and bad. Everything that I have needed was provided for me. Every single thing. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy the way it works out, but you never know how it's going to work out. And so that's where the faith comes in, is that, faith. And I just told we're having a conversation. We're actually having a big debate. The other night, my oldest was sitting up with me and my wife. We were just talking about things. And it was like, faith is very simple when things go your way. That shit is easy.
Yeah.
It's when you feel like you're getting hit and it seems like it's coming hit after hit.
And you're like,
yeah, why me?
Why?
Exactly. And so, but then it always worked out.
Always.
I say this all the time. I got everything I wanted in sobriety. I don't agree with how I got it.
Yeah.
Or how I got to go it. And that's, it's, I'm sure you heard me say this. It's like everybody wants what you have, but nobody wants to go through the process of getting it. They're jealous of what you have, but not jealous of how you got it.
Right.
And so it's one of those, what is good and bad. And it's like, it felt like a lot of bad over and over and over and over. And there was a time I had nowhere to go. So my uncle, my dad's brother, took me in for a while. He had an apartment, so I lived there. And it was about this time, it was about a year into sobriety that I had a friend call and said, hey, have you ever thought about working in treatment? And I was like, no. And she said, well, do you want to give it a shot? And I was like, yeah, why not? That's how I'd say. So I ended up working at the Ranch, Tennessee, which is part of Promises. And I started as an RA. They're BHTs, not even called RAs. But so I worked in the house with the male substance abuse guys, and I worked with them, driving around, all that stuff. But I remember making $13 an hour. And I go from having paid off houses and cars and to making $13 an hour. And so what I was paying in child support, I remember making like $250 every 2 weeks. And I was broke, and I borrowed money to go to work. But for some reason, I felt like it was where I was supposed to be.
Absolutely.
Thank God that we ate at the house, you know.
Yes.
And so at least I got to eat pretty good. I do remember this. We had guys at the house. I worked Sunday nights, and they would always plan a steak for Sunday night so I could have that's how cool it was. And it just always felt like it was just flowing, right? And so ended up, this was still pretty rough. I think about the first 2 years. And I know if you're like if you're new, you don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
But it takes time, because in order to be someone different, we have to change, and we have to go through things. And it's just, I wish someone would have come in and just been like, all right, magical sobriety dust, you're good.
Right.
That shit just doesn't work, you know. I have a tattoo on my side that says the pain will leave and the lesson's over. And the sad thing is you don't get to determine when that is. Mm-mm. But it's true. So either you got the faith or you don't have the faith. So whatever you believe in, whatever you want to do to get sober, there's many ways to get sober. You just got to have faith. You got to keep on that track. But ended up moving over to the case management team at the ranch, and then ended up running that team. But there was a point where I had nowhere to go, no money. Apartments were 4 times what I could afford, you know,
right.
What I was making. And I was just screwed. So I remember my executive director at the ranch at the time, wonderful lady, really took care of me. And I remember going over to her office, and I laugh because we talk about it. I still talk to her to this day, and just say, I spend more time crying in your office than any client ever has. And I went into her office, and she saw my face. She said, shut the door. And I shut the door, and I turned around and lost it. She said, what's wrong? I said, I have nowhere to go. Without hesitation, she said, don't worry about it, I got you. And she gave me a place to live for 6 months till I got on my feet. And to this day, she's one of the reasons that I made it. But that's the cool thing, is that I've always had people show up in my life at the right time. I was just smart enough to listen and to see it. And there have been many, you included. It's, you know, if you work in this industry, I think you don't realize that we learn, and the clients help us too. It's not just one way.
That's what I always say.
It's not. And so I've learned so much from you and all these people that I've been able to work with. So I ended up going from that. I went to, I ran the alumni program at the ranch. But in my heart, I'm a first responder. I've always had the desire to work with police and fire and military guys. And so I ended up, a place opened in Waverly, Tennessee called Magnolia Meadows. And it's what's called the GRIT program, Gaining Resilience in Trauma. And we are for first responders, military. So that includes police, fire, EMS, all the first responders and military. And we do both active and retired. So
beautiful house and campus.
It is. It's very beautiful. 32 acres, gorgeous house. And it's where I'm supposed to be. I loved where I was at. Don't get me wrong. This was the only job I would have left for. But let me back up a little bit. So after all this is coming out, you know, I ended up meeting my now wife. Beautiful lady, beautiful woman, one of the smartest humans I've ever met. And so she was coming out of some trauma herself. So we kind of both met at a time where I don't think anyone, like if you wrote our lives on paper, that we would have the second date, let alone be married, you know. But she's truly my best friend, and she supports me more than anything in this world. And I'm very lucky. But that's a part of, I think, going through what you have to go through is that, you know, I heard a thing that said that whatever higher power you believe in, is that the good things that your higher power God have in store for you aren't getting ready for you. You're getting ready for them.
Right.
Had I met her a year prior, we wouldn't be married today. But I believe that she was a part of my reward for getting better.
Absolutely.
I'll always be grateful for that. I really will. But what's cool today is she works in treatment too, so we get to share the love of working in treatment. And she has her own story and her family history and stuff. And so we're able to support each other through that, which is a really cool thing. It's really awesome. I do miss working. We used to work together, so I miss working with her a bunch. But, looking at it now, so now I'm at Magnolia. I get to, my title is First Responder Community Liaison. Big fancy word, say business development.
It's nice.
But let me tell you what I get to. So what I get to do today is I get to travel the country and talk to departments. I get to speak at conferences about first responders, because there's not like a lot of guys do it. I wish there were more.
Yeah.
Because it's still out there that getting help is weak, and with the police especially. So we do first responders. We get them from all over the country. And we do active and retired, and we do military too. Military guys are a big part of what we do as well. But it's a great program. So we're set up for trauma. We do substance abuse. Most guys that come in have both, which is dual. Because just like with me, when I quit drinking, I realized that drinking wasn't my problem. It was the way I fixed my problem.
Yeah,
it was my solution. And now when people don't understand that, they're like, "What does that mean?" I don't know what that means. But it's the way I quieted down those voices in my head. It's the way I quieted down the visions, the dreams, the nightmares. But the true way to quiet that stuff down and get rid of it was therapy. It was EMDR. I remember my therapist saying, "She did this thing called EMDR," and she explained it. And I was like, "Is that like acupuncture? Because I don't believe in that crap." She's like, "Why don't you just do it anyways, idiot?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'll try it." And I remember a few months later, I was like, "Hey, that's kind of working." And she was like, "That's why I told you to do it." But that's me getting rid of my pride and ego and taking advice from someone else who knows way more than me about it. And I'm forever grateful for having done it. And I still do therapy today.
Yeah.
And it's not something to quit. I still work a program still. I do all of those things because I know when I quit, I'll go back to being that same person, the same thought process, whatever it is. And I don't want to do that. I like who I am today, so I've got to maintain it. So there's been up and downs. There's been, all kinds of things. And I was saying this the other day, my kids have seen me struggle dramatically. They've never seen me quit.
Yeah.
And you just can't quit.
You can't
just got to keep going. Because you never know when that next thing is going to be the thing that helps you, right? I love my life today. I love where I'm at. I love my family. And that's where I want to stay.
Yeah. Like that's phenomenal. Mm-hmm. For people that don't know, this man right here, I met him my first day of treatment. First day of treatment, he came in all happy, like handing out coins and keychains, talking about this program once you got out. And I was like, whatever, because first go around, I just wasn't doing what I was supposed to. This man, when I got out the second time, after I went back the second time, first of all, his wife is phenomenal because she saw me come in, and then I saw him, and then when I got out the second time, this man would call me every Wednesday. "You coming to the meeting tonight?" "I don't know." "Nope." "You coming to the meeting tonight?" "You coming to the meeting tonight?" "All right, I'm coming to the meeting tonight." Like my first 6 months, if it wasn't for him, I might not be where I'm at today. And he knows how special he is to me. My buddy Lee, who's my sponsor now, how special he is to me. But Scott and his wife are like, they are like two of my hired, like they're just my people for life. I'm so glad you came on my show.
Absolutely.
If you had to talk to one person out there that's struggling, and say they're a first responder, what would you tell them? What would you tell them, what would you tell them to try to give them the treatment?
First of all, help is possible. A lot of times we feel like we're beyond help. What I have learned, especially in sobriety, is that my entire life, all I did was maintain. To drink, to do this, to do that. And now someone showed me how to live. And that's totally different.
Absolutely.
And I absolutely recommend it because it's amazing. Doesn't mean I have problems, doesn't mean I have issues, but it's different, and I wish I had done it a long time ago.
Absolutely.
Yep.
With that being said, if you are having problems and you want to reach out to us, please find me on Instagram at Morning Juice Pod. Also find us on YouTube at The Morning Juice. Reach out to us. Please subscribe, pass it along, share it, comment on it. Let's try to get this out there to where everybody can see it. That's it for today's show. We'll see you next time on The Morning Juice. Bye.